So the universe of scholarly publishing encompasses not just journals, which I think you've talked a lot about already, but also certainly in our world, monographs, scholarly reference works, and textbooks. And I'm going to touch on all of those things. I can't do it consistently in each case and give you a full matrix just because of time. But and at one point toward the end of the talk, I'm also going to talk a little bit about what I call the scholarly ecosystem, the scholarly publishing ecosystem, where I'll make a distinction between for-profit and non-profit publishers, not-for-profit publishers. And the ACS is a not-for-profit publisher. Anybody who really the difference is what you do with the money that you make, right? The ACS funnels theirs back into scholarly programs. University presses are not-for-profit publishers in almost all cases. I'm not going to talk about trade books, and I'm not going to say too many unpleasant things about publicly traded for-profits, but we will talk a little bit about textbook prices at the end, because I know some people care about that. All right, so I want to make it clear, I am not a philosopher, and what I'm about to tell you is my opinion, unless I tell you it is the opinion of Oxford or its management, insofar as Oxford can have an opinion. This is not based on any ethical theory. We are an academic publisher. We are, as I mentioned, not-for-profit in many markets in the world. We are the ACS's book publisher. So I think I've got everything that you need to know in terms of what I'm about to say. The stuff that I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about includes things like conflict of interest in, say, if you work for get money from a pharmaceutical company, if you're a medical researcher, so on. We follow two sets of standards. These are they. The Committee for Publication Ethics, those sort of broad guidelines for particular journal publishing. And in the case of medical journals, the ICMJE, we follow their conflict of interest rules. So it's our expectation that everything we get has been adhered to in terms of these guidelines. And so I'm going to sort of come back to now the title of the talk. What do I mean by the word downstream? I mean all the things that don't involve plagiarism, self-plagiarism, data manipulation, or issues around attribution. I'm not going to talk about anything related to undue influence of commercial entities like GlaxoSmithKline. I'm not going to talk about copyright or fair use, or anything related to US law. Instead, I'm going to talk about all the other things that I think are what I'll call in a second ethical choke points that lie downstream. So we assume as a publisher that what we've been handed has high integrity, it is accurate, and it is written by the people that are attributed as authors. So now, if that doesn't happen, does the publisher care? Absolutely, the publisher cares. The publisher's, in many cases, on the hook. There can be legal issues, and there are fairly well-defined mechanisms for dealing with those sorts of things. But I'm going to talk about some softer issues, other things that sort of lie downstream. And basically, I also want to make the distinction between an ethical issue and what I just call a sort of a regular hard decision. Publishers make hard decisions all the time. Not all of them, of course, are ethical. But basically, and I use here what I'm sort of defining as ethics for the purposes of this conversation today, anything that involves material harm. Now, material, obviously subjective. It could be reputational, and that would include, in the case of our humanities publishing program, making sure people get their tenure packets together in a sensible amount of time. Physical harm, something explodes, for example, in a lab, or economic harm. And any of those things. And the universe of people we're talking about are our authors and our consumers, essentially. I'm not worried particularly about the publisher's economic harm. I'm worried about the other two pieces of it. All right, so what are the places where ethical issues arise? These are some of them, the ones I'm going to talk about today. Most of them are procedural. A couple of them are strategic. Most of the procedural ones involve either who we commission to author something, in the case of reference works, where somebody doesn't write it and hand it to us, we go out and find somebody to do it, or how we handle our reviewing. And we just started to get out of that topic a few minutes ago. And the strategic ones, really just a couple, which I will talk about because I think they're kind of interesting. One is about how much should this stuff cost? It's about pricing and what is an appropriate amount of money to charge for access to truth. And secondly, sort of also related to that, at what point do you make a decision not to make something available to a particular group of people? And I'll give you a couple of examples of things that have actually happened in our world related to those. All right, so let's dive in. Who and what to publish? I mean, basically, anybody who has anything to contribute to the scholarly marketplace of knowledge should be able to do so in a reputable press. It's kind of hard to make sure that happens. There are schools and people who have established reputations. They tend to be looked at first. There are issues related to timing in many cases. Especially in STM publishing, people would like to get their data out quickly to make sure that they're not scooped, to make sure that, as I mentioned earlier, that sort of your tenure package is put together, and also in some cases just to get very important information out as quickly as possible. But the publishing community, the scholarly community writ large, has an obligation to make sure that what gets published is in fact true. Because when I talk about retraction, you'll see once something is published, be it digital or print, it's awfully hard to get it back again. So we need to worry about this, this issue of balance. Okay, I'm going to give you a case study. This happens to be an OUP one, not because I'm trying to tout our own products, but it's not a chemistry product. I just want to talk a little bit about how we pulled it together. So here's a place where we decided we wanted to create a major reference work. It's called Oxford Bibliographies Online, and I would describe it as it is anti-Google and it is anti-Wikipedia. And I don't mean anti as a, well, I guess I mean anti as a sort of in opposition to, not sort of phobic. It's anti-Google in that its whole point is to select. It is not everything. It is only a certain corpus of knowledge. And it is anti-Wikipedia in that it includes some analysis and not just fact. So this is from the About OBO page, and we have about, I don't know, 17 or 18 of these modules, mostly in the humanities and social sciences. So then the question became, all right, well, if you're going to go out and build these things, how do you decide who to pick? Because your stated objective now is selectivity. We're going to go out and we're going to find scholars who are going to pick the most important of some body of work. How do you make sure that they do a good job in such a way that people will actually trust this thing? And the answer really revolves around a couple of things. One is number of people, and two is money. So this is the structure of the sort of QA for an OBO. We start at the top with the delegates of the press. Oh, the latest in technology. All right. So we start with the delegates of the press. They're actually all from Oxford. They're the group that meets fortnightly and talks about issues related to scholarly integrity of all the stuff we're publishing. There's one per discipline, and in the United States we actually have our own parallel set of delegates. Most scholarly presses have some comparable system of sort of scholarly oversight. We then have an internal editor. The internal editor selects an editor-in-chief in consultation with the delegate. The editor-in-chief picks a group of roughly 15 people who constitute an editorial board. Those editorial boards go out and commission articles. Those articles are then reviewed by the editorial board, at least 2 non-editorial board peer reviewers. The peer reviewers use a standard evaluation form, which includes a section which I think I'm going to show you in a second. And once the material has been vetted, it's then put out there for the world to see. And we include this open feedback channel, which goes straight back to the reference editor, bypassing the editor-in-chief and the editorial board. Each of these folks are in some way compensated. I'll come to reviewer compensation in a second. The editor-in-chief and the editorial board are given specific training on how to maintain balance. Now, we just launched this product, and I just sort of highlight this as an example of sort of the lengths to which one needs to go if you want to maintain the credibility that's going to be required, but also pull off the goal, which is to have this succinct place, one place where you go online and see everything that's seminal. So I just wanted to point out, these are the guidelines for reviewers. These are what reviewers are expected to answer. You'll notice right here, this is the part of dealing with controversy, unresolved questions, has to strike a balance, diverse viewpoints, all viewpoints should be reflected, it shouldn't be polemic, should avoid partisanship, so on. Now, is it possible that one person would not follow these? Certainly conceivable. Is it possible that 2 or 3 might not? Conceivable. Is it possible that 18 wouldn't? Less likely. And the more you involve people, the less likely you are to end up with anything that's egregiously wrong. All right. Very quickly on this one, because there's a common practice. I asked the question, is it acceptable to ask people to submit their work to only one publisher at a time? This is, I think, universal practice here. The answer is yes for journals, and if you say, well, why is that? And the answer is simply, there are impact factors. And people would, if they could submit to multiple places, would simply pick the top 15 impact journals in their area and submit simultaneously. Those journals will then go out and, talking about reviewer fatigue, commission more or less the same people to review those things. So a model has emerged where people, I think, start at the highest impact factor they think they're likely to get serious consideration at, and then move down the list. Now, there's no such thing as an impact factor for a publisher. So we do not expect the same sort of thing on our monograph publishing, for example. The only place where we expect people to work with us exclusively is on anything that's commissioned. So if we go out and ask somebody to work on a book, could be a textbook, that's fairly common in K-12, or on reference works like the one I was just talking about, then yes, in fact, we expect those people to submit work. And this is a sort of a phenomenon I call opening the kimono. Once a publisher starts working with an author on the massaging of an idea, of content, they don't want to know that at any point that could be picked up and used by one of their competitors. So if you want your publisher to deal with you candidly and directly, it's important to have this sort of period of exclusivity. All right, what about this business about time? Well, pressure increases as the impact of the thing increases, or as the time you have to produce it gets smaller. So really, there's no other way to deal with this except to review as broadly as you can. This is sort of the cold fusion problem, right? You have to review as broadly as you can. You have to get as many people as you can to take a look at anything that you suspect to be controversial. Publishers have got to communicate their expectations to reviewers about how quickly they're going to turn this stuff around. And reviewers must never say yes when they mean no. And they must never sit on anything. They have to respect those deadlines. It is such an important part of this scholarly wheel. I think the other thing to say about speed to market is that, actually, never mind. I'm going to skip through this one really quickly here. All right. So this one. Who gets to decide if something is good enough to publish? Is it okay for an editor, an external editor, or an editor at a publishing house to reject something unilaterally? Is peer review per se conflict of interest? And will related to the phenomenon of people posting things online, if you're anonymous, do you say things that are less civilized, less carefully thought out, less well argued than you do if you know that your name is going to be associated with what you have to say? I think the answers to the first question is yes. It's not obvious that it should be yes, but I think it has to be yes for all kinds of reasons, not least of which is, again, this finite pool of people who are available to review. And if an editor cannot say no on their own, if they don't have an opinion about which pieces are appropriate for a journal, then if they have to commission reviews every single time, will rapidly evolve into something where not only do I think the overall quality of what's being reviewed go down, but in essence, a number of things that everybody's going to need to review is going to soar. What about the issue of it's impossible for anybody to truly be objective? Well, that's probably true. How do you, as an editor, a specialist, a peer reviewer, not bring what you know about a topic to it, especially if you know the identity of the person whose work you're reviewing? It's very hard not to do that. And I do think, actually, that one way to deal with this is to actually invite people who are reviewing to declare conflicts of interest. I'll talk about that in a second. And also to give them the opportunity to identify themselves. In fact, I would actually argue it would be better off if we defaulted to reviewers being identified and let people opt out rather than the other way around, which I think is what's currently practiced, it's certainly in journals. What about sharing feedback? What's the right thing to do here? You have now all this information. Some of it, most of it, 99% of it probably, really, really helpful to the person whose work is being reviewed. Is there an obligation to share that? In the case of things like grant proposals and in many cases journal articles, I think some version of that information is shared. Not, I think, usually reviewer names, but the feedback of the review. And I think that's good. In the case of textbooks, it is not often shared until the work is under contract. And the reason for that is simply publisher interest. The publisher, again, is not interested in assisting somebody who's going to go to a competitor to produce a superior work. So once again, because the publisher, in the case of books, are not looking at something in series, but rather in parallel with other publishers, they keep that closed. And that does mean, in some cases, a lot of reviewer feedback doesn't actually get back to the author. All right, so here's basically what I think folks should do, what publishers should do. Editor training, I think it's extremely important. External editors should be on fixed terms so that if you have a problem, you can do something about it. There should always be an oversight body, in our case, the delegates or a broad review board. I think we should invite reviewers to declare possible conflicts of interest, and I think all reviewers should do so, even if not invited. Reviewer blind means the reviewers don't know who the author of the work is. I actually think that's probably the best way to go, although I recognize in highly specialized cases it'll be very obvious to one specialist and another specialist having to do it. But in some cases, in certain markets, that's less the case. It is also important when people submit their work to a publisher that they let them know who they would like to review it. And if there's anybody who ought not to review it for any reason, what I call frenemies, they should alert the publisher about that as well. In many cases, the publisher won't know. The only thing that helps there is if the editor is, the internal editor in this case, is aware of discipline dynamics. And with rapid turnover, that's tough to do. So it's really, I think, up to individual authors to let publishers know where good places to review would be and not. All right. What about compensating these people who are spending all this time getting fatigued? Well, this is the current state of affairs. This is your compensation. karma is probably the problem, the biggest problem. Is it enough? And if it's not enough, if you need to sort of work down the tree, free books or cash, which is more often associated with educational product, then that costs money. And where does that money come from? And I don't know that anybody has an idea about this. I will posit that this is going to not be good enough for a while. I think for much longer. I think people are going to start saying, look, we need to come up with some sort of a system. And it is really just it's a volume issue. The amount of stuff that's being published. There are more journals than ever before. There are more books being published than ever before. So we're going to need to deal with this karmic problem. Yes. All right. Pricing. I mentioned. Oh, sorry. This is about reviewers. You can't see this in the spirit of being honest. I put the entire email here. This is from somebody named Jerry Bedo, who's at National Social Science Press. This is a letter to a person teaching a cultural anthropology class. I've redacted the professor's name. It's, blah, blah, blah. Except for this line here and highlighted in red, which I've expanded for you here. I would consider this to be inappropriate compensation. Furthermore, I would argue that this is trying to tempt somebody into unethical behavior, and it is therefore itself unethical. But I don't think any publisher, even a publisher of a higher ed product at $8,000 to a reviewing professor and $15,000 to the department is an appropriate amount of money for a class test. Happy to listen to anybody who disagrees.
It's too much money.
Okay. What about retracting and correcting released information? There are established criteria for journals, and journals actually, in a way, have the easiest opportunity to do that because they have subscribers, they have online archives. It's actually the easiest of the universe. Textbooks, monographs, reference works, a little bit tougher. The other thing that's making this much more complicated is the fact that with print on demand, there's no such thing as a printing anymore in many cases. Books are printed as they're ordered, and so you can't just look on the inside front cover and figure out which printing you're looking at and therefore whether or not it's been corrected or not. So this is an area of sort of publisher angst at the moment. We are trying to figure out how we make sure that information that is incorrect, and again, I usually really mean materially incorrect, possibly injurious, how we make sure that this stuff is fixed in the public sphere as quickly as possible. But I do think that's something we need to get better at. All right, I am, in the spirit of time, going to skip this, although it's quite fascinating. And I will simply say that there are some markets in the world where some things that would seem innocuous to a Western scholar will incite problems, serious problems involving people getting killed. And publishers of scholarly material, certainly in the humanities, have to have a way to deal with this. And we have such a policy. It was not easy to draft because it seems, on its surface core, inimical to the true intent of scholarship to suppress something simply because some people will find it offensive. However, if you're a global publisher, as OUP is, and you have offices in places like India and Pakistan, which is where some of this happened, you can't afford to have your people getting killed. So that just kind of enters into it. And it's unfortunate, but it's a reality. Pricing. How much should we charge for stuff? And is it okay to have different prices for different people? Now again, there's already a system in place, but there's some stuff going on that may impact that. So here are the sort of 4 market segments. Each of those pay currently different amounts of money for access to scholarly content. Students are the largest group with the least cash and make the most noise. And one will hear from them rather a lot. Libraries, and librarians in particular, are small. They tend to be funded by the states. States are not awash in cash at the moment. We're starting to hear more from libraries. although they've certainly often complained about costs. State governments, I just talked about them. They're always looking for ways to save money. That in the context mostly, of course, of K through 12 textbook purchases. All right, so this is my ecosystem argument. My argument is that you can look at how much publishers spend on a very detailed level and you get very confused very quickly. Or you can look at the whole industry writ large and you can say, overall, how much money does it make? And you can ask yourself the question, whether or not it's a reasonable amount. And the answer is, within a couple of percentage points, for the scholarly publishing market, it's about 10% margin. That is to say, you bring in your money, you put out your expenses, you have 10 cents on the dollar left. Is that a reasonable amount? And I think the answer is yes. And what that means is that on average, prices are about right. Now, textbooks are an exception because, well, for two reasons. One, there's a weird market dynamic. The person who picks the book is not the person who pays for it. And when you disconnect those two things, you get strange decision-making dynamics. And the other is that textbook publishers in general don't make 10%. They make more than that. So my argument doesn't apply to them. It just applies to the scholarly world. All right. So if that's true, give me a second here to catch up. All right. So then the question is about process. What do publishers do, and are there ways to save money? And this will be sort of my final point. So here's the value add of publishers. Everything goes through this part here, depending on what it is. It may have more or less of it. This is print here. This is digital here. Currently, publishers, of course, are doing both, so their expenses are roughly double. And then this is what happens after you've produced your product. Okay? So these are all the things that a publisher does that add value to this sort of enterprise. All right. If you say, all right, well, we have a duty to keep these costs as low as possible in order to make prices stay as reasonable as possible, what about digital publishing, and what about open access? Well, here's what happens. In digital publishing, obviously, and open access tends to be digital as well, right? Your print costs disappear, but everything else stays the same, with a couple of exceptions. If you're doing open access and you're not selling or marketing your thing, you don't have any sales or marketing costs. If your subscription management and payment distribution, if there's no money in open access, you don't have those. But everything else you have. Now, I have never heard of a successful, sustaining open access initiative. Never. I don't think it's possible, because this guy right here, in particular, is very expensive to do hosting. So, I actually think that, again, in terms of pricing, there may be some places where things are a little out of whack, but in general, the way this sort of ecosystem, as I've argued it, works more or less right. There may be some places to save a little money, but it's not going to be massive. Not going to be massive. Print, paper binding is maybe 5% of our costs. So we're not going to see prices coming down, I think, anytime soon. A couple of things I'm not going to talk about I left up here, and I apologize for running along.